Sorry I can't be there today. I'm in the Interlake for my camp director job doing a church visit, but this will allow you to hear some stuff about our time anyway. Our time in Turkey was fantastic. It's one of those things where you know that your boundaries are going to get stretched, and despite your anticipation of that, it still happens, and it was amazing. Our very first night there, we'd been traveling for a long time. I think I figured that I'd gotten about 7 hours of sleep spread out, like in the last 54 hours. We were exhausted. But we just finally gotten settled in, and one of our leaders arrived from Antalya in the south of Turkey. And he asked if we wanted to go out. And as tired as we were, Braden and Tyson and I went out with him and another leader, and we got some food in a little dimly lit diner type place, and then we walked down to the water. And there's something about being in a brand new place like that where just everything is different, the smells and the sounds and the faces and the textures. And as exhausted as I was, like, it's just electrifying. It was so cool. Like, we're actually there, you know? It was a running thing that we tried to keep our perspective on throughout the trip. Tyson and I would keep joking that our vocabulary was so limited that all we could really say is like, this is crazy. Or, you know, if you think about it, this is kind of wild. But like, there was real truth to that. We never wanted to get used to it. We kept reminding each other as often as we could to take in the little details, to be in the moment as much as we possibly could. Because even though it felt like months worth of experiences, we were only gone for 3 weeks. As for the missional aspect itself, it was certainly stretching. Something I'd come to realize in college is that I'm more gifted in other areas than I am in evangelism. And I didn't necessarily get way more comfortable with it on this trip, but I think there's a lot of value in not pigeonholing yourself. I'm only going to do this because it's what I know I'm good at, right? Like, there's a lot of value in pushing yourself in ways outside of your comfort zone, obviously, right? So a lot of what we did on this trip was on the street evangelism. And I found that if I talked to a new person shortly after the previous conversation, like within 10 minutes, it wasn't too hard, but any longer than that, and it began to feel impossible again. Momentum was key there, because otherwise I had to really grit my teeth and go, okay, here we go again. Time to talk to a total stranger about faith. But a thing that we realized is that one of the big cultural differences from East to West, among many, is that people are quite open about the topic of faith. It's not the intensely personal, private thing that it is here in the West. People were more than willing to talk about Islam, either for or against it. We talked with a lot of young people, both because we're fairly young, and because the young people there were far more likely to know English than the older ones. And a lot of the young people that I talked with were kind of disillusioned with Islam. Very few would have identified as a good Muslim. We were there during Ramadan, which ended up being a great opportunity to talk to people, because we could just play the dumb tourist card. I'd be like, I don't know anything. It's Ramadan now, right? And they'd go, yeah. And I'd go, right. Are you fasting? And regardless of their answer, we're talking about faith. I was surprised with how many no's I got to that question. There's a lot of people that weren't fasting, which told me that they'd realized that Islam didn't provide what they were looking for. That in their anger or disillusionment or emptiness with Islam, they'd kind of turned their back on religion as a whole. Which then the question, of course, became, how do I tell you that you're right in that Islam has left you unfulfilled? But it's because you're made for Christ. We're made for a relationship with Jesus, right? That's the whole question or approach, right? And there was middling success. Sometimes that would go really well, and sometimes, it didn't. And that's evangelism, I suppose. But there's also, I think that's kind of the universality of the whole thing too. That was a big takeaway for me, is that the place is so different. Like, Turkey is wildly different than here, of course, right? In terms of like just the food and the atmosphere and the way like history and geography have shaped the culture. And yet it's full of people. It's made of human beings, and people are not the same, but the human experience is resonant everywhere, I think. Like, I remember there was a Muslim woman that told us that men would be very angry when a woman paid for something. And I was like, what? That's ridiculous, kind of. I didn't obviously say that, but, and she was like, well, they feel shame. And I was like, right, of course. Like, I've felt shame before. like even if the experience on the outside of it is totally different, the internal like emotional core is the same thing, right? And that was a big takeaway for me, was even though the outside is so different, it's a place full of people, and people go through the same things and experience the same emotions. And so you're able to, look at one of the 20 million people in the city and go, yeah, I kind of recognize you, sort of. That was, I guess I'm already at 5 minutes, geez. My kind of final story, sort of the last outreach thing that Tyson and I did for, we were actually late for our wrap up because we were talking to this guy. We got tea with this guy who gave us directions, and he was high while we were talking to him. He was definitely like self-medicating with drugs and whatnot, and just kind of, you could tell, like, he was talking about a lot of hurt and pain in his life. And we want to talk about the good news. And he goes, oh, kind of like this, and like pulls up his sleeve, and he's got like a fresh tattoo. Like he still had the plastic wrapping on it. I don't know. I don't have tattoos. But like it was fresh, and it was a book that said on one page, good, and the other news, good news. And we were like, why do you have that? And he was like, well, there's so much bad news in the world, you want to hear good news. So I gave myself a little reminder, and we were like, yeah, kind of like that. we talked to, so we shared that Jesus loves him and whatnot, and he didn't become a believer. But he didn't like reject, like he was so close. Tyson and I walked away from that encounter going, that guy's so close. A thing that I remember Gord talking about at SBC was that it's not like there's one decision, you're a unbeliever and then you're a believer and that's the only decision. Like it's just a dozen little, more than a dozen, like little decisions or little encounters along the way. And I'd like to think that the conversation we had with that guy moved him one step closer to Christ, because he really was in a place where one day, he knew that he was looking for something, and he didn't quite accept it, but he was intrigued by it. So, and that's just one encounter out of many. It was truly an amazing time. We were so blessed to go, and it'll be one that sticks with us for a very long time. So thanks for listening, and thanks for letting me go 2 minutes over. Sorry to the rest of the crew who now has to shorten their speech. My bad, guys.
Yeah, we went to Turkey. We conquered. We did lots of things in Turkey. Thanks, Andrew, for the long video. We all tuned you out at 3 minutes, so don't worry about going over. We arrived in Turkey on the Monday, and all we had time for was dinner. So on Monday, we had dinner. We met our team. It was very good. We all introduced ourselves to each other. Tuesday, we did orientation. We learned about Turkey, the history of missions in Turkey. Learned a little bit of Turkish, which is really fun and helpful. Turkish people love it when you speak Turkish to them, so it was really fun to throw out the few words we knew and watch their faces light up. It was really cool. Wednesday, we did our outreach. That was the big day. That was the day that we had little surveys, and they started off with questions like, what's your favorite food, or where are you working, are you studying? And then halfway through, we'd hit them with a question that was like, what are you most afraid of? And then just conversations starting off of these questions was really good. And then the last question on the survey was, do you think God loves you? And the honesty was really shocking. Everybody would just tell you how they felt and what they thought. We were just walking around asking people if we could survey them. And we did that a lot. We did that Wednesday, Thursday. Pretty much any time we could, any free time, the leaders would always be like, okay, who are we talking to? Let's find somebody, right? And then on Saturday, we went to the island. I don't know how to describe the island. It's on a national holiday, Children's Day. And lots of people come to this island to go pray in a church at the top of the mountain or the hill or whatever. Greek Orthodox, yeah. Greek Orthodox church, and it's just a huge event of people going up and trying to get their prayers answered. And there's so many superstitions and so many crazy things to us about like superstitions on like if I do this then my prayer will get answered. Like one of the things is a thread. You have a ball of thread and you tie it to a branch at the bottom, and if you walk all the way up to the top of the hill into the church and that thread hasn't broken yet, then your prayer will get answered. But if that thread breaks, someone steps on it, the place is loaded with thread, then your prayer won't get answered. So it's just like people are so confused, they're so desperate. It was kind of sad to see, but still, all in all, a really good way to talk to people and to pray for them and to encourage them and stuff like that. And then on Sunday, we went to church. We went to a Turkish church service. I actually went to one in English, one in Turkish. It was really cool. Church is so much different. It's, you walk through a restaurant, up a flight of stairs, and then into a little room, and then there's just church happening in a room like a quarter of this size, maybe less. It's very cool. So yeah, that's kind of what we did. Do you guys have stories you want to share?
For sure. I just wanted to share like a highlight, a low light, maybe a story or two. But as I shared before we went, there were some connections that I had made online with friends in Turkey, and I'd been talking to them for over a year. And so part of my hopes with the trip was to be able to meet them while we were out there. And there were many barriers that could have prevented us from meeting because Istanbul is ginormical, and so the area that we were in might not be the area where they lived, and it wasn't actually where any of them lived. And so to be able to meet up with them, for instance, this girl here on the picture, I got to meet up with her actually on my birthday. Me and Emily went to go have supper with her, and we just spent time with her. So she is one that I was able to be connecting with for over a year. And then others who came like 2 hours away to come and meet up with us. Like this girl here, she joined the four of us for like the afternoon when we were visiting in Istanbul, and she just joined us, and she was fasting, and so we could talk to her too about those different things, and she already misses us a lot. And so that connection of in person was just a highlight for me, being able to go visit Izmir with a Christian friend that we had made through SBC, and she got to tour us around to Ephesus. We got to join her in her ministry that she is involved in, and she's just so much joy. I got to stay with her and her roommate, and that was a blessing. And then I got to meet up with someone as well later in our trip, the day before I left, and we got to go 10-pin bowling with her. So it was just kind of like these little activities that I got to meet up with them and catch up almost on some things we may or may not have talked about, to ask them questions, just to be interested in their life. So that was definitely a highlight for me. A low light, I think, the more I reflect on it now, was actually not being able to speak Turkish very well. And that's because when we went up to people, we were always hoping that they would be able to speak English. And the fact that we couldn't just go up to any person and start speaking to them in Turkish was challenging for me, and so then that just felt like I was ill-equipped, or just that I was kind of failing in some areas because I didn't know that. So one quick story was I got to help at what they call BCC, so Bible Correspondence Course. So it's a building, and it's got tons of literature in it, and they have a program where people can request to get a Bible, and then they mail it out to them and send courses along with it. And when the people get it and they want to fill out the courses, they can send it back, and they start this dialogue between the people who are interested to get to know more about God. And they actually have workers all around Turkey that are even connecting with these people through text and meeting up with them to see if they have any questions about faith. And it's just this really encouraging and powerful ministry that's going on there. And one thing, just that we can continue to pray for, is there's a lot of unknowns and uncertainties for workers in Turkey. And we actually, one of our team leaders, while we were there, was having to leave that same week because she was being kicked out of the country because her visa was not renewed, and she had a code that she deemed a threat to the government. And so for even families, it's very hard with the unknown of, well, will we be able to stay here? How long? When will we have to leave? And building up these connections so we can continue to pray for the workers who are there, just for peace in their hearts, as even now this one who's leaving, she doesn't know what she's going to be doing next. So there's always that uncertainty there. I just had a verse that I want to share, Ephesians 6:18. It says, "And pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people." And that's a really encouraging verse, especially as the language was a bit of a barrier, and so I learned to do a lot of praying. All the people, all the masses of people we were walking through, or when I couldn't engage in the conversation because it was Turkish, I could pray for that person. And so to continue to pray and pray for the Lord's people as well was something big takeaway for me. And Emily came with us. She's from Blue Manor Church, and she wants to share a story with us too.
Yeah, thanks for letting me share a story as well. I also, just was so privileged to be able to go along on this trip to Turkey. And a big highlight for me was actually getting to know our team leaders. They were all full-time workers living in Turkey. And there was one outreach that we went on where I got to go along with one of these workers. And just getting to know her heart for the people and just seeing practically how she reached people was just really cool and inspiring for me. And we talked to this one lady who ended up sharing that she just really, really wanted a child and couldn't have one. And so this worker, her name was Olga, she prayed for this woman that she would be able to have a child, and she was just so excited and just had this look on her face. It was like she hadn't experienced anything like this before. But then after we were finished praying, she reached into her purse and pulled out 50 lira and wanted to pay us, which was just shocking. Like, we would never think of being paid for praying for someone. But again, I think it was kind of evidence of, like Tyson was talking about, just this confusion where people feel like there's just always this need to do stuff for God. And Olga ended up sharing with this person just about God's grace and how everything he's given us, it's for free. He doesn't expect payment, which was just different than what she had been told before. So that was just a really cool encounter for me.
Yeah, so to give some context about my story, when we got there, we had orientation. You want to click through? When we had orientation, we were instructed on different vocabulary that we can use and what we can't use. So we couldn't say missionary because in Turkey, missionaries are kind of seen as terrorists. And so they kick them out of the country, and they get just super, they're normally super open to people and talking about faith, but when they talk to a missionary, they close right up and they don't want to talk to you. So we can't use that word, so we use the word M, or worker, instead. And then the organization that we're with, we call it the company. And then Muslims, and because we can't call them Muslims because then that sounds like we're other than them, so we just say cousins. So we have little vocabulary just to avoid any issues that we could have. So one time when the rest of the gang was at BCC, I was with a guy named Blake. He's an Australian guy. He also speaks Turkish. And we were walking around trying to find some guys to talk to during the day. And there's this one guy sitting by himself, and it's kind of the first conversation I led because Blake's Turkish came in handy all day. So it was mostly him doing most of the talking, and I asked him questions and he would translate. But this time, this guy spoke a little bit of English, and then we're kind of going through a bit of the survey and asking questions, what's your favorite food and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden we started talking about, I asked questions about Ramadan and faith, and then as you saw before in one of the photos, we were given out these little booklets that would tell about different versions of love, and the kind of love that God provides for us and how He loves us, and it's in Turkish as well. So then I gave him the book, and he's like, "Oh, you're a missionary," and I was like, "What do I do?" So then we kind of ended the conversation. We felt that we just needed to leave that area. And then I walked away just super discouraged. And I was like, I don't know if ministry is for me. I think there's other people that can do it better than I can. I don't. So I was just really discouraged. I was getting in my head. And then we had supper, and I was just like feeling pretty down the rest of the evening. And then we got to this point where half of us were going to go back, or maybe a small group were going to go back to the hotel and just relax because we just had a really busy day. And then the other people would just continue, just go back to the waterfront where I was before and do some more ministry and talk to some people. So I kind of lost the other group that was going back, so I was stuck with the group that was doing ministry again. I was like, I just want to go back. I don't want to do this. And then I just got into a conversation, and they were asking about my camera. So like my camera came in handy so many times to just to break down walls and just to start a conversation. And so then we got talking, and I actually got to use different analogies to describe like the gospel to them, and they had never really heard it before. And then I got to the point where they're asking about the Injil. The Injil is the New Testament, and they really wanted a copy. And luckily we had one on us, and we were able to give it to them, and they were just super happy about that. And yeah, it was just it was like the lowest low to the highest high in like a couple of hours. And that was just a really cool experience for me. And we also went to Izmir. This is Izmir, or not, this is Ephesus. This picture. There's one more. That's it? All right. If you have any questions or whatever, I got lots of photos I can share, so you can come talk to us after the service. And we'll chat with you guys. We'll answer your questions if you have. We'll show you some photos. Yeah.